Hi, this is Chef Jim Swasey again at Cambridge School of Culinary Arts here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Today we're going to be talking about roasting chickens. For a lot of professional chefs, roast chickens tend to be one of those benchmark ways that you can measure someone's skill. And it's because, while it seems like a relatively simple thing to do, there are lots and lots of little details involved. And it's those little details that can show how attentive a cook really is to the product and how much care they take in doing something as simple as a roasted chicken. This is a standard broiler fryer sized chicken, so 2.5, 4.5 pounds is generally the rough size. Pretty common size to find in any supermarket out there. One thing to remember whenever you're working with chickens is that they are not the most sanitary of creatures and they're not always raised in the most sanitary environments. So if you're working with chicken, keep it as clean as possible. You want to wash this bird scrupulously inside and out, just to mitigate in case there are things like salmonella and other things like that which we don't want to experience. This chicken has already been washed. And before I roast it, I'm going to add a few flavorings on the inside, a few what they call aromatic flavorings to provide a little bit of flavor, a little bit of aroma. This can really run the gamut. Kind of anything you'd want to do would work and be appropriate. I'm using fairly traditional ingredients today. We have a couple smashed garlic cloves and maybe a few pieces of onion that are going into the cavity. Some lemon. Lemon and chicken is a terrific match. So we'll do a few pieces of those in there. And also a few fresh herbs. I'm going to use thyme and parsley because I like them and because the flavors work well together. But here again, really anything you want to use would be completely appropriate. Those are all going to go in there. Now, one of the things that professional chefs hear a lot when people ask about food is, what's the secret ingredient? What do you use that other people don't use? There really is no secret ingredient for a lot of professional cooking. A lot of it is simply salt and pepper, but used with maybe a little bit more abundance than home cooks would. Salt, in particular, is easily the most important seasoning we have in the kitchen because it lifts the flavors of everything else around it. It makes the mouth salivate. It makes the food taste better. Most chefs prefer to use kosher salt because we do a lot of seasoning by hand, and it's easier to handle than using table salt out of the shaker, but use whatever you have, whatever's available. I want to make sure to season the bird both on the inside and the outside. So a little bit of salt and pepper into the cavity. And then on the outside, I do think it's important when you're seasoning, especially if you're using with your fingers, to let the salt rain down from on high. If I were to pinch this salt and just sprinkle close to the chicken itself, you get big clumps of salt all over the place, and that's not the most palatable thing in the world. You'd rather have something that's spread evenly all over the breast, all over the legs. Same with the pepper. A good sprinkling kind of all over. We'll do the underside as well. Before this bird is ready to go in to the roasting pan, I'm going to truss it, tie it up so that it's going to have a nicer shape when it comes out, when it's actually done. I'm tucking the wingtips underneath the bird. The twine goes over the legs, underneath the cross, make a small X, pull the drumsticks together nice and snug. Take your twine around the side, under the shoulder, over the neck, under the other shoulder. We'll tie here on the side, looping around 3 times. Look nice and snug. And then 1 knot for good measure, so that when the bird comes out of the oven, it'll have a nicer looking shape, nicer looking appearance. Other flavorings, other adding things, like maybe a touch of butter smeared around the skin or over the skin, could be good little sort of optional flavorings. You certainly don't have to use them. Julia Child used to speak a lot about giving the bird a butter massage. I won't argue with Julia Child. She knew what she was doing for a long time before any of the rest of us did. So maybe a little bit of rub down of butter would be kind of nice. Certainly, you don't have to have it if you're watching your weight, if you're health conscious. When it comes to actually the roasting part of roasting chickens, you're going to hear lots of different opinions and different ideas about what's good and what's not good for roast chickens. I'll give you my take on a few of them and try to give you the differences of opinions that are out there. I would recommend you try them all. Try as many as you like, see which ones work for you and which ones don't. The first one would be oven temperature. I tend to roast my chickens at the same temperature all the way through, and I tend to roast them fairly high, about 400 degrees, and do it all the way through. There are those people who will tell you it might be a better idea to start with a hotter oven, 425 to 450, for the first 15 or 20 minutes, and then turn the oven down to a lower range, 350, 375 Fahrenheit, for the remainder of the cooking time. The theory behind that is the really high blast of heat at the very beginning will promote browning around the skin of the chicken, around the bird. I've never worried about that much. 400 is suitable for me, so that's what I tend to do. The pan that we're going to use to actually roast the bird, we have a lot of different options out there. I tend to recommend anything that can go both in the oven and on top of the stove. So this is a standard roasting pan that can go on top of the stove so that we can make a pan sauce later on with the bird afterwards. It could be a skillet, a cast iron skillet, a stainless steel skillet. It could really be anything. As long as it can go on top of the stove, that I think is generally a better bet. Some people will also put a roasting rack inside the roasting pan, a rack to elevate the bird up. The thinking behind that is that the hot air of the oven can get underneath and it can crisp the skin all over the place. Myself personally, I don't worry about that all that much. I just take the bird and put it right into the pan itself, right on the bottom of the pan. The thinking for me behind this is that if you get a lot of contact between the bird and the pan, then you're going to get a lot of nice browned bits on the bottom of the pan, and that can be very tasty if you're making a sauce later on. Plus, the oven rack is one extra thing to clean, and why clean more if you don't have to? So a 400-degree oven, the bird goes in, we've got our aromatics stuffed in there, well seasoned, a little bit of butter or oil, something like that, and then it's going to go in there. Now, the way we know it's done, there's lots of different schools of thought about this. Cook for so many minutes per pound, blah, 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 that sort of thing. Really, a lot of those are kind of inexact. Generally speaking, a chicken this size in a 400-degree oven is going to be about an hour. But really, the safest way to make sure that it's cooked all the way through is to check the internal temperature with an instant read thermometer. And we'll talk more about that once the bird is out. So into the pan, all ready to go, and we're off. So after your chicken has come out of the oven, the area that you want to test if you're using an instant read thermometer is in the thickest part of the thigh. And you want to make sure that when you put the thermometer in, that it doesn't touch the bone, because if it touches bone, bone conducts heat differently than muscle tissue, and it will give you a false reading. It will actually make the chicken seem like it's cooked when it's not. The magic number for all poultry out there is 165 degrees internal cook temperature. At that temperature, we know it's safe to eat if there's things in there, bacteria and other things like that, that are going to cause illness. Some old cookbooks will have older numbers, 170, 180. That's quite high. 165 is plenty, and the chicken won't be dried out. So we test in the thickest part of the thigh because that's the part that takes the longest to cook. The breast meat will be totally cooked by then. The dark meat is what takes longer. When it reads 165, out it comes from the oven. This chicken was roasted on a half sheet pan, a baking sheet. And you can see here on the baking sheet, we have a lot of bit of brown bits left underneath from where the chicken was sitting on the metal itself. Those brown bits are very, very valuable as far as recapturing flavor in some sort of sauce later on. So I just want to show you a quick pan sauce that's out here. In order to recapture the flavor of the roast chicken, you take your baking sheet, roasting pan, whatever you have, put it right on the stove. Now, some home baking sheets might not be appropriate for this because they're thin and they tend to warp. This one is a little bit thicker. We know we can get away with it here. A roasting pan, like I did earlier, would be ideal because it's nice and heavy and there's no worry that the metal is going to warp at all. In order to dissolve all these bits, all you need to do is add some sort of liquid. I have here chicken stock and a little bit of white wine. It could easily be water. It could easily be beer. It could easily be red wine. Anything that you have lying around the house. If you're using commercial stocks that you purchase rather than make, which we do here at the school, you do want to be careful. Some of them have a great deal of salt added to them, which can be difficult if you're trying to cook them down or thicken them at all. So I'd always recommend to buy low sodium versions if you can, if those are available. Deglazing is the term that we use for actually dissolving all these little brown bits up. And you don't need a great deal of liquid if the pan is really, really hot. Just a little bit, and then scrape with a wooden spoon, and all those brown bits will start to come up and release. And that can actually go into our sauce eventually when it's done. All those brown bits, everything like that, can just get added in. And here in this pan, I have a little bit of other browned deglazed liquid from earlier, from another chicken. Gives a great rich color to the actual sauce itself. All you want to do with this is cook it down, reduce it a little bit. You can thicken it if you want by having some flour added into the pan before the liquid goes in there. I'm also going to add to this a little bit of chopped shallot, just for extra flavor. We let this all come together, kind of simmer, and then at the very end to give a little bit of richness to the sauce, all we're going to add is a little bit of whole butter. Again, for those of you that are health conscious and don't want to add this, there's no reason that you have to. You don't have to add the butter if you don't want to. But it is a nice addition as far as rounding the flavors out, giving a little bit more richness. You want to be careful of the heat when you decide to add your butter into your sauce. You don't want the sauce to be boiling because then the butter will separate and the sauce will taste oily and taste greasy. So just barely any heat at all. This, in fact, the heat's almost off on this. And that's fine. The heat of the sauce is enough to actually melt the butter without the butter breaking, without the butter separating. To give a little taste, if we want to adjust, we can add a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. I think a little bit of lemon would be nice because we have lemon in the chicken. So just a squirt of lemon juice. And it's really as simple as that. It takes almost no time at all, provided you have the right equipment. Now, if you're trying to do this with something Pyrex, things like that, that won't work because you can't put it right on top of the stove. So you have to be aware of that. This can go right here in our sauce boat on the side. It's important when the chicken comes out of the oven that it rest for a while before you cut into it. You never want to cut into anything out of the oven right away because the juices of it will run all over the place. You need to give it time to rest, good 15, 20 minutes, particularly if it's a larger roast like a turkey or a big rib roast, those sorts of things. So our chicken is rested here enough that now if I cut into it, I'm not worried about juices running all over the place. I'm just going to take my knife, cut the legs down, take the leg and the drumstick right off. Here on this side also, the leg and drumstick. Can come right off. The breast meat itself, we just want to carve right down the center of the bird. We can turn the bird slightly. And just use the tip of your knife and follow the natural line of the bones that's there. The bones that are inside the bird give you a great guide as to where to go. Use the tip of your knife. You can always go back and cut in more deeply. You don't need to try and get it all in one fell shot. We'll take this breast off here with the wings attached. That would be nice. The leg, if it feels like a big portion, we can take this and split it so that we have the thigh, we have a drumstick, a plate here, thigh, drumstick, the breast meat right on top. A little bit of our natural jus, just with a little bit of the butter poured right around it. And you want to sauce it as close to service as possible because the whole joy of chicken is the nice crispy skin. You don't want the sauce to be on top of the skin and letting the skin go limp beforehand. And it's as simple as that. That can go out to the table. Your guests can enjoy it. Roast chicken is not hard, but it is something that requires a little bit of attention to detail. Try the different varieties that we talked about. Find the one that works for you, and you'll have a great roast chicken every time.